Estongo and hello, I'm Tim Long and this is Unequal Temperament. You just heard the fantastic Martha Redbone singing her great song, Medicine Man, which is our theme. And I look at music as medicine as well. So you hear that through Martha and I hope you guys check her out. Before we get going, I want to remind you guys that you can subscribe to our podcast, Unequal Temperament with Tim Long, wherever you find your podcast. And we would really appreciate subscriptions because it helps us a lot. In addition to that, later in the podcast, we are going to be taking audience questions, and you're going to see this scrolling along throughout the show. So you can write in to say hello. You can write in just to say anything you want or to ask questions because we're going to have the question and answer segment later in the show. So what's on my mind? There's so much on my mind. I don't know what to do. Deb Haaland, since I've last seen you guys, is now our Secretary of Interior. It's a huge moment for Native American people. We've rarely been represented, and I'm so proud of her for taking that position and for representing her people with her dress as well when she was sworn in. In other news, I got my second vaccine. I'm all microchipped up and ready to go. I don't get that because, my God, we have iPhones, we have Alexa, Siri, we're being watched anyway, and I'm fine with that. But getting on to today's show, there's so much difficulty happening in the world. It's always been there. We're sort of unpeeling it and seeing what's been lying underneath. And after the Atlanta killings, it was just heartbreaking, really, and it got me to reading a lot. And I have a lot of people who reach out to me, which is great. I was talking to some friends last night, and we all have people reaching out to us to help us to understand things. I have a lot of people reaching out about music, Native American composers, and I think that's wonderful, and I'm so thrilled to help. The thing that I want everybody to do, though, is when you're interested in Native American art or any kind of BIPOC art, I want you to invest in learning about their history in this country, because that's how you're going to learn their perspective. That's how you're going to learn what inspired this art. And there's a lot of beauty, there's a lot of ugliness there as well, but I think it's so important that we learn about each other's struggles, because so many people in this country think there have been no struggles, and I'm here to tell you there have been major struggles. So it's never too late to become an ally. And I know a lot of people are often nervous because they feel like they know nothing. And you know what? It's fine to start where you are. That's all we can do. We start where we are. We take one step at a time. We learn one thing, we learn another thing, and suddenly this entire world will change for you and humanity will change for you. It's such an important thing, and I hope you all will take the time to be proactive allies for all of us. So in my readings, getting ready for today, because I spoke to our guest today last week, and it was just so heartbreaking, really. And I thought, well, I should learn more about what has happened in this country. And one thing that I read about that I didn't know was the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, and I'm going to tell you about that. This is from history.com. It was the first significant law restricting immigration into the United States, because before that they had no laws because they were all Western European. Many Americans on the West Coast attributed declining wages and economic ills to Chinese workers, although the Chinese composed only 0.002% of the nation's population. Congress passed the Exclusion Act to placate workers' demands and assuage prevalent concerns about maintaining white racial purity. So this went on for a long time, and it wasn't until 1902, listen to this. Supreme Court upheld this act in 1893. In 1902, Chinese immigration was made permanently illegal. The legislation proved very effective, and the Chinese population in the United States sharply declined. American experience with Chinese exclusion spurred later movements for immigration restriction against other undesirable groups such as Middle Easterners, Hindu and East Indians, and the Japanese with the passage of the Immigration Act of 1924. Chinese immigrants and their American-born families remained ineligible for citizenship until 1943 with the passage of the Magnuson Act. By then, the U.S. was embroiled in World War II and was seeking to improve morale. So, you see this violence today, and you can see that it was built in. I mean, we inherited this violent tendency towards outsiders. I say that as a Native American, towards outsiders, I should say. I also find it very fascinating that this nation was founded, it was indigenous land. Indigenous people were pushed out. And when you look at the southern border, where we're looking at all of the immigration and the children, who is it trying to get in? It's not Western European descendants in South America and Mexico. It's indigenous people in South America and Central America who are trying to get here. So we're just sort of caught. I also read about the murder of Vincent Chen, which was a really big deal in 1982. He was murdered, and his murderers were only charged with manslaughter, and they were ordered to pay $3,000 and serve 3 years probation with no jail time. And this is 1982, and it caused a huge uproar for great reasons. But it just shows you the inequities that go on in front of our eyes. And sometimes we choose to look past these things. Sometimes it's too painful to look at these things. I for one, say, as a brown person, I've lived part of my life in denial. It's much easier to live in denial because when you start looking at inequities in this world, you're not just looking at inequities to a group of people. I'm thinking about my family. I think about all of my ancestors who went through this, and it's sad and it's angering, and what I try to do is use that energy to become proactive in educating people and to talking about it and representing my people. And I think that's an important thing for all of us, to represent who we are so that we're connected to our groups, so that it humanizes them. Anywho, that's my history lesson for today. It's just important to know, But anyway, so this all leads to my guest tonight. My guest is Kelly Kuo, and I first met Kelly years ago when we got together for coffee in Aspen at the Aspen Music Festival, and he's had such a prominent career. Kelly is, in 2008, he became the first conductor of Asian descent to lead a performance at Chicago Lyric Opera. And he has since returned to conduct performances of Charlie Parker's Yardbird and to work with the Ryan Opera Center. He is artistic director of the Oregon Mozart Players and recently extended his contract through 2024. He's conducted many orchestras. Oh, look at that doggy. Ah, so sweet. An Oregon native and recipient of a Schulte Foundation U.S. Career Assistance Award, Kelly continues to concertize as a keyboardist, as the only pianist to have studied with two pupils of the Russian virtuoso Vladimir Horowitz. That's a big deal, and I'm jealous. So welcome, Kelly. Thank you for being here with us.
Hi, Tim. Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. And I know you're in Orlando because you had a room run through of Carmen yesterday, right?
We had a work through, let's put it that way.
You know how things go. Okay, a work through. That's how they go sometimes.
Stumble through.
Yes, stumbling is necessary. But before we get going any further, on this podcast, we always do land recognitions, which began in Canada. I witnessed them in Canada, and they're starting in the United States. And the reason I like to do land recognitions is because they put you in a place of humility and honesty. And with land and with native land especially, I am moved because I am native, but I'm also a logical person, and it's logical that we know that part of our history. So I'm in Rochester, and I acknowledge that Rochester is located on the unceded lands of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and by doing so, I acknowledge their longstanding presence on this land, which precedes the establishment of New York State and the United States of America. And you're in Florida.
Yes, specifically Orlando, as you said, working on a production here, but I'm currently on the ancestral lands of the Seminole and Timucua peoples. And of course, acknowledging that it's their gift to allow us to be here and to occupy their space at the same time and share our art with the people who live here currently.
I love that. Thank you. And because I'm Muskogee Creek in Choctaw, and Muskogee Creek were originally in Alabama, Georgia, northern Florida, and we were once the same group as the Seminoles, and we actually have the same language and everything. So they are really a part of our tribe as well. And if you guys want to learn about how to do a land acknowledgement, the first place you want to go is the Native Land app, which is free, but you can punch in any address, or you can just put the location on, and it will tell you who the original inhabitants were, and you can start doing your own land recognitions, because it goes one person at a time, and once we see one person do it, others become comfortable, and we start recognizing that. So another thing that we sometimes do, because we have difficult conversations, is we have a little drink. So today I'm having a nice Chimay beer with me. And what do you have, Kelly?
I have good old Yungling here, which is not Asian, despite the name. You know, you might think it's Asian, but it's good old American, related to Germany.
You're not going to choose an Asian beer? What are you talking about? How dare you?
It's actually kind of funny. It's funny, Tim, because I was actually in New York a couple of weeks ago, and I went to an Irish pub, and they had Yungling on draft, but they had spelled it Yingling. I kid you not. I was like, is this a new Asian beer I don't know about? They said, no, it's actually Yingling.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad you're here. And so you're doing Carmen right now. And how's that going? And how is it during COVID times?
Oh, my goodness. It's so weird to be able to be doing this when so much of the country is not able to. And this, I have to give credit to this company for putting them coming out on a branch and really taking a lot of chances. It's a very ambitious project. It's a production that is set in 1960 Haiti, specifically because the Haitian community here is actually quite large. You may not know that Orlando has, I guess, the third most spoken language in Orlando is Haitian Creole, due to the immigrant situation here. Yeah. And so what's unique about this production, well, one of the many things, is that all of the dialogue is going to be spoken in Haitian Creole. And we have a Haitian Creole. Absolutely. Yes. It's completely new. And so all of the cast had to, thanks to the pandemic, were able to coach via Zoom with our Haitian Creole expert and in advance. And so by the time they got here, they were fairly fluent with their dialogue. It's a matter of putting it to staging. So it's been so fresh to hear that language being spoken in the midst of these rehearsals. We're singing it in French, but the French influence in Haiti, of course, is quite prominent. So it takes place during an oppression period where the Tantamakut were the mafia of Haiti to a certain extent, and Duvalier and Papa Doc were this central character that oppressed everyone around them, kept complete control over them. And so we have that presence always there. We have three supernumeraries who represent the Tantamakut, and they're always on stage. And because of that affects all of the interactions and relationships between everyone on stage. So it's quite unique. And because it's set in Haiti, I've taken some liberty with replacing, or I should say substituting, Bizet's original orchestration in terms of the percussion, which is so flavorful of Spain. I've just substituted some Haitian instruments in its place, same rhythms, and so it may come as a little bit of a surprise. And we do a little bit of something different at the beginning, which my goal is for that, when they hear the initial sounds, they look at their tickets and say, am I at Carmen? Because this isn't what I signed up for. So we're not really doing the overture as written.
How fascinating. Whose idea was this?
It was our stage director, Sarah Witzer, came up with the concept in her mind and brought it up to discussion with the people who run Opera Orlando, Gabe and Grant Pricer, and they went with it and were extremely thrilled about the possibility of reaching out to their community here, a community that often doesn't get much access to opera for all the same reasons why underrepresented minorities really have a difficult time getting into opera, finances and access and all of that, education. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Will you be streaming or anything? I mean, can we watch it anywhere?
I believe it's going to be one of the performances might be streamed. I don't know all the details yet, but I don't want to speak out of turn, but I believe that's the plan, because the hall is, of course, socially distanced. And I believe I was told that they're able to sell 700 tickets in a hall of relatively somewhere over 2,000 seats. So approximately 1/3 of the house is going to be sold. And I've heard that one of our performances nearly sold out, so already with a week to go. So that's very exciting for the company at this time. And we've been doing all the COVID protocol. We've been testing once a week, all the cast and team members, production, supers, everyone. And the company has been providing that testing on site, which is great. And everyone, of course, is wearing masks. The first time we actually see our singers without masks, I say the chorus and the principals, is when they're on stage with makeup and wigs next week. So it'll be, I think, it come as a big surprise to everyone when the mask is revealing their face.
Yeah. I just heard through my ear that you can buy access to the stream online at operaorlando.org. So
fantastic.
I just hear it in the ether, But thank you, Emily. So have you been performing all this time, or is this your first back?
This will be my first in front of an audience. My orchestra in Oregon has been recording and streaming since September for various events. We had a gala fundraising event. We've had some recitals, and we basically had to pivot like everyone else did and turn our season into a completely streamed season. And also due to the mandates that were in place for the state of Oregon, we've also had to change programming because we were unable to use winds and brass for most of this early part of the season. And so that involved a lot of creativity to change some things in the repertoire. But thanks to our donors and our board and our executive director who's been really on fire with this sort of ability to still keep in touch, keep a line open to our patrons and find a way of contributing music to their lives, because it's so difficult for everyone. And just you said earlier on, music is really there to serve, and medicine. Exactly. So
well,
I've been performing and
real. When you hear your first applause with a live audience, I think we took it all for granted, really. So I'm so happy for you, and I'm definitely going to watch that Carmen, because that sounds like a real original. And so what are we talking about? So we're talking about, you told me in one of our talks, it was so fascinating because I really didn't know about this group in China. You were telling me about your parents and where they came from. And as I said, in my opening, there's so much that we need to learn. And I think that we all need to be proactive ourselves about learning. And I thank you, because in the talk that we had, I don't know, we talked a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and it was just so eye-opening. And I just started reading a lot more about things, and I was horrified. I was horrified by the Chinese history in America, really, and also sort of ashamed that I didn't know any of that. I mean, there's so much to be horrified by in this country, really, and so much to be proud of too. But we've got to acknowledge all of it. But before we go there, we're going to go to China. So can you tell me about your parents and their ethnic group?
Sure. Both of my parents are ethnic Hakka Chinese, which is as close to indigenous as you can get in terms of Chinese. If you go way back in the history, they started up in Mongolia, and Hakka literally means guest people. So you can guess what that means, in that they were nomadic because they kept on getting kicked out from region to region to region. And so over the years, centuries, the largest populations of Hakka in the world are in Canton, in Taiwan, and in Vancouver, BC. So that's all concentrated along the Pacific Rim. And so my parents grew up in Taiwan. They were born in Taiwan. Actually, my father was born in mainland China for other reasons. But my grandparents grew up in Taiwan under Japanese occupation. And so when they were growing up, they spoke Hakka at home and spoke Japanese in schools. And then, of course, when the nationalist government came over, when it got after their war with the communists, pushed them away, they escaped to Taiwan and basically established Taiwan as a new China or part of China. And so they made the official language of Taiwan Mandarin. And so then my parents grew up speaking Hakka at home and then Mandarin in the schools. Even though at the same time in Taiwan, there was also the indigenous Taiwanese who have their own dialect of Chinese. And you have to understand when I say dialect, they're mutually unintelligible. They're a completely different language. If I said
Taiwanese and Mandarin, you're talking
about all the Chinese dialects are mutually unintelligible, except for the true dialects. And I say true dialects like Hakka has two dialects. My mom speaks one, my dad speaks the other. So they're mutually intelligible and they can understand each other. But the primary language I heard them speaking when I was growing up was Mandarin. And when they didn't want us to understand anything, I say us, my younger brother and myself, they would switch to Hakka. But as soon as I was growing up in daycare centers, when my mom went to work full time, and English was really the only language I was hearing at that time. And from that point on, I only spoke English. So I still remember actually probably my very first memory ever that I can really feel is when I think it had to have been my first day that I was brought to the daycare center, because I just remember this feeling of not being able to understand a thing. Apparently before I up until the age of 4, I only spoke Mandarin at home. My parents would speak Mandarin to me. I would speak Mandarin to them because my mom was still at home. And as soon as she went to work full time and I was in the situation where I was immersed in English, that's the only language I communicated in at that point. I don't remember how the transition happened, but pretty much soon I was only speaking English. And I didn't speak Mandarin really again until I got to college. My mother's father had passed away when I was a senior in high school. And I had thought about the times that I had seen him in my life. We'd always go back to Taiwan about every 7 years or so to see relatives. And I remember seeing him, but I don't remember saying anything to him because I couldn't. And I didn't like that feeling when I was in high school. And I'm sure at the time I felt both embarrassed I couldn't say anything, and also, just being a child, just immature about it, not really contemplating the consequences of that. So when I got to college, I ended up deciding to take Chinese on my own as sort of an extracurricular thing, because I certainly was, I had my hands full with music studies and physics studies, but that's another completely sidetracked that we're not going to go into right now. But yeah, I don't know, Tim. So I picked up Chinese in college and ended up double majoring in it. To make a long story.
How is it now? How's your speaking?
My speaking is, I think, still pretty fluent in terms of being able to understand and to communicate what I want. Now you have to understand that after 3 or 4, 5 years of study, I ended up knowing about 3,000 characters. And to read a Chinese newspaper, you need to know about 5 to 6 to 7,000 characters. So after all those years of study, I was probably around 3rd grade education in speaking and writing and reading. And so my vocabulary is still pretty much limited to whatever a 3rd grader might talk about. They're not going to talk about politics. They're not going to talk about a lot of different things. But I can get around and I can certainly communicate my basic needs, and even about music. I actually got to spend time in China working there a couple of times in Beijing at the National Center for the Performing Arts. And before I went, I spoke to a friend and got a lot of musical terminology. I actually did this in Taiwan too, because I spent 9 months in Taiwan studying Chinese when I was in college. And part of my time there was working with musicians. And in exchange for accompanying them in their recital, I got lessons in musical terminology in Chinese. So all of the andante and allegro Chinese has their own terminology. So I learned as much as I could. I wrote down in both in Chinese characters and romanization so that I would remember. And then I carried that over into China when I was working with singers. And it's really interesting. It's become such an important part of my life and probably one of the best things I've ever done.
That's fantastic. I just have so many questions. First of all, this is a really geeky question. Is there IPA for the intonations of Mandarin?
There are, yes. So basically they're lines, right? So there are 4 tones in Mandarin. First tone is a straight horizontal line above the vowel. Second tone is a rising line from left to right. And third tone is like a carrot upside down. And then fourth tone is a line going from left to right, descending.
Well, I always love it when love it. Whenever I mention a Chinese name to another Chinese person, I always see them, they're translating it in their head. They chew on what I say and then they make it right. And then they recognize the name, but not with the American accent. So does Hakka have its own alphabet?
Hakka is not a written language. I know that there are people who have done a lot of linguistic research on Hakka language, and I think there is a dissertation. I saw it in the University of Oregon Library once when I was a student there, where they've basically Romanized Hakka, but it's not something that I don't think is as pervasive as Mandarin Romanization for sure. And the thing about Romanization is that, well, at least in Mandarin, there are 2 forms of Romanization. One is called the Wade-Giles Romanization, which was done by, and Wade and Giles were Jesuit priests, I believe, who went over as missionaries to China and created this Romanization system. And I think I was talking to you earlier about that. And that's how my last name, in the Wade-Giles system, a K with an apostrophe is pronounced with a hard K, like K. But a K without an apostrophe is pronounced voiced, like a G. So my last name is actually Guo, pronounced with a G. And in the current Romanization, the one that's used today, it is spelled with a G. So if you see Guo, it's the same last name as Kuo. And then Cantonese, the same character might be pronounced differently. Maybe, I think it might be even Kwok, Kwok, Kuok. There's so many different ways of pronouncing it in different languages that that's why it can get a little bit confusing. When you're dealing with Romanization systems, you don't know which one it is necessarily. When you look at the name, you might have to listen to the name pronounced by the person in order to know what character it actually is.
That's how my languages are as well. They're not written, but they were Romanized by missionaries and all. So we do have a written language, and some people read it and many don't. Hey, this is a quick geeky question as well, because one of my favorite pianists just passed away recently, and I don't know how to say his name correctly.
Fu Song.
Yes.
You're talking about Fu Song. Yes.
Yes, with the apostrophe. So is it just as it looks then?
Well,
Fu, it's like TS apostrophe or something.
TS apostrophe, yes. That's the old Romanization, which means it's pronounced unvoiced, TS. If you had, it would otherwise be Zong, which is a different pronunciation of a completely different word. Mm-hmm. But TS with the apostrophe, that's why it's there, is because it's the old Wade-Giles Romanization.
Well, I was always so fascinated by him.
First one. Yeah, he was the first real well-known classical musician from China.
And he was with all the stars in London as well, Dupre and all of those.
Hmm.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
I printed out his bio and I read all about him and I read about his father's writings and all this stuff and it was just fascinating and beautiful. So and I listen to his Chopin still because I like listening to older pianists. There's some brilliant new ones too, but I like listening to the old ones. Um, so I mean, you've had such a successful career conducting, and it sounds like you found a really great combination in Oregon with that orchestra, and you're there for what? You've signed up through 2024, yes?
Correct. I've been there since 2012. So already entering into my ninth season coming up.
It must be nice to really know the players that well.
You don't know half of it, Tim, because I actually went to school with a lot of those players. I went to
Oh
school at
gosh,
the University of Oregon, and the orchestra existed at that time. And actually, a Taiwanese woman was music director of Oregon Mozart players at the time. So this was revolutionary. Not only was it a woman, it was a Taiwanese woman, and she was a bass player. Apo Shu is spelled HSU, is now teaching in Taipei, but she was music director of the Oregon Mozart players when I was in school. And the current concertmaster of Oregon Mozart players was a doctorate student who I accompanied when I was undergraduate as a pianist. And so a number of the musicians, when I first signed on board, were either professors when I was in school or colleagues, classmates, and in addition to a mix of new people. And there are still two people in the orchestra who are founding members of some 40 years ago. So it's an eclectic mix of young blood and old blood.
really is like going home then.
Absolutely. There's advantages and disadvantages to that, Tim.
Yeah, I'm sure. I could imagine. It's nice to run away sometimes. So where do you live right now? Where's home base for you?
Cincinnati is my home base. I've lived there since 2006 with my wife and my two stepchildren who are almost 21 years old. My goodness. I met them when they were 4 years old, and now
Crazy.
time has just flown by. Yeah.
And you're 65 years old, or I mean, I just don't know how you have that, but
Well, you know, you have the Asian filter on, right? So you got to take that out.
exactly right. I always say brown don't crack, but it sure does sag. That's for us. Anyway, so one of the things I talk about quite a bit is people see you, they see me, and I know sometimes we can become the exception to the rule of our ethnicities. You see like a violinist come from Juilliard and you think of them differently than you think of an Asian person on the street. People see me conducting an orchestra and they think of me differently than they do of Native people suffering, in the Navajo Nation with COVID, with no support around them. And I think it's so important um, that we represent our people, that we, if we have any kind of a public face, that we represent all of the millions of people who don't have that public voice, so that they can be seen more as human. Because I know if you don't know somebody who is of an ethnicity, then you don't necessarily see them with the same amount of humanity. So that's why I found it so moving talking to you. And of course, with Atlanta last week, it was just horrific, really. And I've been baffled this whole last year that when we're talking about BIPOC things, that Asian people are rarely included in those talks. And I've brought that into meetings and nobody seems to respond. And there's this whole idea I've heard of Asians being called the model minority. And I'm wondering if that's why they weren't included with BIPOC talks. But and then we see what happened last week, and Asian people are as just in as much danger as everybody else. And my God, did you know about that Chinese Exclusion Act? I didn't know about that of 1880.
Yeah,
It's horrific.
it's pretty heavy. It's pretty heavy. I mean, and the Magnuson Act that you were talking about wasn't really that much better because as far as Asians were concerned, they still couldn't own land. The Chinese could not own land, right? You can become a citizen, but you can't do this and you can't do that. It reminds me of a lot of stuff that's being discussed today in certain parties and in the governments to, just was it yesterday or today, the law that was just signed in Georgia that is basically reminded me very much of what was going on with the Chinese Exclusion Act. If you don't like something and you want to take back your power, you just create another law, which makes it happen. And it's
really not that long ago.
Absolutely. It's probably just less than 2 decades after that, my parents came to the United States. My dad came as a PhD student in soil chemistry in Oregon State University in Corvallis. And that's what brought him over, was the opportunity to study agricultural chemistry in a place that had a lot of promise. When my mom came over I think in 1970, maybe something like that, she didn't speak a word of English. She was, in fact, fresh out of college. She just finished I think she was 21 years old, just had graduated from college in Taiwan with a degree in architecture. Didn't speak a word of English and came here. So if you follow back to my story way back early on in our conversation, Hakka was their first language, Mandarin was their second, and English was their third. So if you can imagine speaking to your children or having any kind of conversation of deep meaning with your third language, you can then start to empathize with what my parents did their entire lives. It's really, and it's only as an adult now that I can really let that digest in a way that's meaningful. Because the way I was raised in this rural part of northern eastern Oregon, English was pretty much the language. It was very much a white dominated community, and there was a melting pot in a way that there was one representative of pretty much all of the Asian ethnicities. There was a Korean family, one. There were a couple of Vietnamese families, some mixed, one half Japanese family. There was I think 1 or 2 Black families that I can remember. A larger group of Hispanic families. Latinx community was a little bit larger because of the farming aspect, agricultural. But overall, I would say it felt like 98% white to me. Mm-hmm. And because of that, I grew up not wanting to stick out as different than my friends. Maybe part of me felt like that because I felt like I was a target if I didn't try to blend in a little bit more. Yeah. Being picked on, I'm sure it's something that a lot of people can relate to. And so I tried to stand out in ways that I thought might help me from being picked on. I could excel at reading and be part of a book club, and then invite people to be on my team because I knew I'd be reading for everyone, and it helps people, do their homework better, get better grades. All those sort of things were things that I put on my armor, so to speak, in order to protect myself.
I think also, we're similar ages. I'm a little bit older than you, but I think, both with you and even with Native Americans, there was a sense of assimilation for our generation. Our parents wanted us to excel and not suffer what they suffered. So, and I think that's why a lot of that generation didn't think about passing language on necessarily. But one of the painful things, as I said, about learning about history and looking at current events is sort of associating that with our ancestors. And I sort of hate to ask you this question, but how are you doing in the wake of the Atlanta killings? How did that affect you?
For me, in particular, it hit me in a different way because my wife is a massage therapist and she is Vietnamese. And I've known very intimately what it's like to be married to someone who is in that occupation, because she talks to me about, almost rarely does a day go by that she doesn't get a call on her pager asking for a massage in a hotel room late at night. And that's not what she does. She's been a professional for 2 decades, has her own office, no walk-ins. It's everyone has to make an appointment in advance, and she's done that for almost pretty much 2 decades. And yet she still fights the stereotypes that are associated with the sexualization of Asian women in particular, and what they associate with Asian women in this particular line of business. And that's just been part of what she's had to deal with. And as a result, as her husband, I've always had something in the back of my head, this fear that someday something like that could happen to her. And I've buried it almost in a way because I think I wrote something about not wanting to manifest it into reality if I think about it too much. And also just amount of bandwidth that we have on any given day to do that, to carry that burden. Sometimes it's easier just to pretend that it's not there. And so when this happened
now?
Well, that's a really good question. My wife and I have had conversations very quickly about that. And she's fortunate to work in a building that has cameras in it due to some previous events that were not related to Atlanta events, but certainly with security issues. Now there are cameras in the building. But she's also very much about taking steps to empower herself, and so that she doesn't have to live in fear. But it really wasn't until Atlanta that things escalated to this point where she felt like she really had to take action. So she's been looking at self-defense classes, and you have to talk about how you might change your lifestyle, maybe the work hours. I'm not speaking for her, but I'm sure things that have been crossing my mind, like, can you change your hours so you're not working late in your building or after people around you in other offices are gone for the day? Can you take other steps to, and for example, there was, she has a security lock on her door, which was installed after some other security breach. So she's very smart, and she takes really good precautions in order to protect herself. But even then, there's only so much you can do. But at the same time, you have to face it. You can't run away from it.
Is it scary? I mean, you must worry for her. And I wonder if you worry for yourself at all. Like, have you been accosted in any way?
We were walking on the street earlier on in the pandemic, my wife and I, in our neighborhood, and certainly there was a car that drove by that the window was rolled down and words were spoken and shouted from that car towards us as we were just simply walking our dog on the street. And this is in Cincinnati, not more than a number of months ago. And that's not something that I experience regularly, fortunately for myself, but with the pandemic and certain triggers that were laid in place by the former president.
Good Lord.
Allowed
this is awful.
A lot of things like that to come to the surface. And
are you comfortable?
Vincent Chen. I mean, talking about Vincent Chen, you brought it up. Look, he was attacked because people thought he was Japanese, not because he was Chinese, but because there was the ongoing auto wars yes. with Japan and Detroit, exactly. Right? So because two white guys,
and they were jealous of the Japanese success, so they killed him, and they got 3 years probation.
Right.
It's
but
just
because
disgusting.
They couldn't tell that he wasn't Japanese. He had black hair, had Asian features, so he became a target. That's a whole nother conversation as to why we can't tell apart Japanese, French. We can tell apart German, French, Italian. Why can't we tell Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese? I mean,
Feel free to say no if you want, but I mean, are you comfortable telling us what they shouted at you?
You know, Tim, I would be comfortable, but honestly, my wife would probably remember. I think I've buried it as to what the words were that were actually said.
Yeah.
My wife would have it very much close to her heart, and she'd be able to tell you right away what it was. But I can't tell you without a doubt what those words were, honestly. And I would have no problem. But like it or not, for me, I have tended to bury things so that they don't become a cloud over my everyday existence. There are a lot of things that happen in my life, and sometimes I am able to move forward only because I've conveniently chosen to forget about them or bury them in a way that they're not prevalent in my memory. I don't know if that's with the post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD, but maybe it is. It's really, I think it could be very much related to that, where because I don't want to have that PTSD, I just conveniently remove it.
And you want to be strong for your family too. I mean, I completely get that because, like you, I didn't want to be seen as different as I was growing up. So I really tried my best to assimilate. The older I got, the more I realized, I haven't done a very good job of assimilating. So why not just be myself? But, as so many people reach out to me for racial advice on both on music and other, I've taken it upon myself to study every day. I read every day on Native issues and history with the United States. And it's sort of like what you're saying. I haven't done this before in my life, before this past year. And it's truly painful. I every day I'm angry at some point and overcome with sadness. And I have to sort of alternate my reading about history with like Buddhist readings, honestly, because they can pull me back to center where I'm not so affected. But I think that's one of the scary things for everybody, whether you're a BIPOC person or whether you're a Caucasian person. If you're a Caucasian person, if you confront this stuff, you're going to see horrors and you're going to have to rethink who you are and who your ancestors were. So for all of us, it's a reckoning, but I think it's hugely important. And I'm just so glad you're here talking with us about all of these difficult topics. And I'm just looking at the time, and I think we should go to Emily, our producer, and see if we have any audience questions. Oh, Emily, are you around? Hello. Oh, there she is. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
Hi.
Hello. I have some questions. Inquiring minds want to know, as Kareem said, quoting the National Enquirer. So Kelly, here's an easy one for you. Randy's curious, as far as the adjustments that you made instrumentally to Carmen, what were the specific instruments that you added in to take the percussion to the next?
Sure, there are various drums, of course, djembes and other Haitian drums of different sizes, some barrel drums. There are rattles, there are shakers, there are two different types of cowbell. Just trying to find something that was more earthy in representation of the climate, the environment that's portrayed on stage. Not anything as sophisticated as a triangle, for example, and definitely no castanets in this particular production.
Do you ever yell out more cowbell?
I literally rewatched that the other day. So good.
Gave away my secret. I'm saving that for my one line, my one humorous line as a conductor. I'm just timing it right.
Timing is everything in comedy and music.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's fluid, Emily. To answer your question, because our percussionist is fantastic. He's on board with it. And we're starting with a ritual on stage, a voodoo ritual that's related to Lilas Pascha, who is a woman. It's Mama Lilas in this production. And so she's doing a ritual with some dancers on stage because Carmen and her ladies, Fresquita and Mercedes, are part of that culture. It's interesting because in Haiti, there was a very strong Catholic population and a very strong culture population that was entrenched in voodoo, but they all sought their faith. They put their faith in something. So it was, whether it be voodoo or Catholicism, there was always something that they took faith in. So Carmen and her circle were voodoo. So we actually start with an improvised drum solo where there is a ritual going on stage. And at one point, I interrupt it with the fate theme. So we skip all that chirpy Toreador stuff at the beginning. We just go to wah-da-da-da-dum, and that immediately sets the tone after the drumming, because that's what I want people to go, like, check their tickets and say, is this Carmen? Because
it's your own tragedy of Carmen. You're Peter Brook all over again.
Well, I don't want it. It very well might be written up as a tragedy by the way we perform it, but at least my interpretation of it. I hope not, but it's the orchestra is going to play great. But we're using reduced orchestration. I have to tell you, can I just pour off some steam, because we're using this reduced orchestration that has so many mistakes in it, Tim. It would drive you crazy as a conductor, talking about 21st century. I've just spent all day today, my day off, my free day, looking through for more corrections, because we found probably close to 100 pretty major errata already. This is from 2006. In the parts and in score. And we're not talking, and this is like, I thought it was a more recent reduction, but it's 2006. And it's all in grade.
Where it comes from or not?
Recording, excuse me. I don't know, where was that? Recording, Italy.
For those in the back.
Yeah, thank you. I would say that if there were parts that were played on perform, they should have been sent, or at least an errata list, because it makes our lives so much more difficult. And I know this orchestra is going to play the pants off of it, but I just want to make sure that they have accurate notes in front of them. Because
it sucks because you can't really rehearse. I mean, you're just correcting.
Yeah,
exactly. It's extremely frustrating talking about nuance. I mean, they're very, very, very easy to work with. But we're all frustrated when we hit those roadblocks that just make it seem like we're playing clams when it's actually just what's in the part. Yeah. You know, when you get to the first rehearsal, Tim, as a conductor, you're like, usually the first time through, you might expect human error, some misreads, whatever. It just happens, right? It always happens. But we can't actually tell if it's a misprint or someone just fucking up by accident. And then we have to basically wait until the second time through in order to figure out, well, it definitely is a gremlin. We call them gremlins because we can't use anything more obscene in our rehearsals. They're gremlins. And it's, my gosh, I just want to say no more whammies is what I want to say.
Well, good luck.
So Emily, that was a long answer.
What else do you have, Emily?
Well, here's a very important question. This is from Randy, and this is to Tim. Tim, do you need another drink? How are you on your beverage?
Hey, I'm going slowly. This is a beautiful Chimay, so I'm trying to savor it. And Randy made me a steak before this started to. Oh my gosh, are you on your second? I thought you were slurring a little bit.
I've got my Founder's Solid Gold in the fridge for afterwards, so I'm on the level with you all right now. But you just wait for the after party. So here's a question, Kelly. Are there things that friends or allies have been doing or saying in the wake of what's happened in Atlanta and all the many other kinds of experiences of violence over the last year that maybe they've done or that you would wish that maybe they might do for you to support you and to express solidarity?
Good question.
That's a really great question. Honestly, I think the most important thing people can do is educate themselves about and read, just exactly what Tim is doing, to learn. We only grow by learning. And whether it be spending the 5 minutes a day that you might have normally spent going to Starbucks to pick up a latte, look up whatever, even better. Here's a challenge. Whatever food you're eating, if it's Asian, Black, Italian, do something to read about the history of that culture in the United States. Because Italians experienced very much similar assimilation questions when they were doing immigration. My goodness, if you look into the history of whatever food you're eating, you're going to learn a lot about the United States. So that's my invitation to everyone. And all of us we didn't arrive at this place overnight, right? We came here over centuries and decades and centuries of just repeated beatdowns of pretty much everything foreign. And this doesn't happen just in the United States, around the world, wherever you are, anything that's foreign is beaten down and is treated as an outsider. So we're not exclusive, but we live here. So I think it's our responsibility to find out more about the people who live here. And
especially, can I say, when people are shouting, "Make America Great Again." I look at educating ourselves not as about educating ourselves about others, but it's about your own personal growth as a human being. You learn so much, and it changes you. And it changes your relationships with everybody not just people who are different. So it's such a hugely important thing to do.
I think something along what you just said, I just read something really interesting earlier today, is that racism is understood as an intention rather than an outcome. People think of you, a concept of racist, as a person who has the intention of being a racist, and ties this definition then to all the social and legal consequences to hate crime litigation, when in fact it has more to do with just the reality of the situation, that there doesn't have to be intent for it to be racist. For example, you're talking about the Chinese. Exactly. You're talking about the Chinese Exclusion Act. That wasn't illegal. In fact, it was legal because they put it into law. Exposing 4 million Vietnamese citizens to Agent Orange, also not illegal. Forcibly relocating 120,000 Japanese Americans to internment camps during World War II, also not illegal.
Yes, Black people with the Tuskegee experiment.
Right.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's not intent. It isn't, and I don't know. It's so ugly and terrible, but so important to know.
Exactly.
Okay, Emily, any more?
Just real quick, do you have any pianists that you really love listening to recordings of that you could recommend with your seal of approval of what you like to listen to?
I think it really depends on the repertoire personally, but one of my favorite recordings ever is that of Byron Janis playing Rachmaninoff First Piano Concerto. I'm, as a couple of generations removed from Horowitz, he was my idol growing up, and so I listened to his recital from Moscow over and over and over and over and over, to the point where the first time I brought a piece from that recital to my lesson, my teacher, after a long silence, said, "You've been listening to Horowitz." And that was the start of Kelly is no longer allowed to listen to recordings before performing something from memory for the first time in studio class. Best lesson learned ever. But yeah, as far as the modern day pianists, I'd like to introduce Eric Liu to the conversation. L-U, Eric Liu. He won the Leeds competition not too long ago, and I've worked with him a couple of times, and he is doing some fantastic things. He studies at Curtis. In fact, I think he's still a student at Curtis. He's so young, but such an old soul in his playing. I really believe in him, and I think he is going to do some great things.
I've seen his name. I'll have to listen to him now. I haven't listened to him before, but I'll definitely go listen tomorrow morning. Well, fantastic. Emily, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for the questions. And One thing I want to do before we end this is Rome. If you're there, are you there, Rome? I would like to see this clip that we have of Kelly. It's a performance at Seattle Opera. And what piece is it, Kelly?
This is just a trailer for Charlie Parker's Yardbird by Daniel Schnyder, and it's a couple pieces of music that have been stitched together ever so professionally, but there'll be a sort of a collage of images from the production as well.
Great. So, oh, here it is. Okay. That looks so exciting, and I tell you, I'm sure you feel the way I do, and this is why we do what we do. We love singers. I don't know how they do all that. I don't know how they do that. Do their lines, sing and follow conduct, act. It's just crazy, but that looks incredible. Before we go, can you tell us about upcoming projects you might have?
Sure.
I know you're busy.
Coming up. Oh my gosh, it's super busy. Next week, I have two things coming up. I'm conducting Organ Mozart Players. A program is called She Says. So it's a female-centric program. So we start with Jessie Montgomery's fantastic Starburst for string orchestra.
Right.
And then Chi Yoon Kim is playing Haydn C Major, a wonderful violin concerto. And then, if you can believe it, we're doing the premiere of my arrangement of for string orchestra of Emily Meyer's String Quartet in G minor. Emily Meyer, if you don't know the name, she was the most famous German female composer during the Romantic era. And it's a complete shame that her music is not more prominently played, because she was extremely famous and had music performed all over the place at her time, personally funded. She was single, I believe, and she spent all of her money trying to promote her own music but obviously during her time, she was very well known. But now, almost no professional musician I've talked to actually knows the name immediately. And so I arranged the string quartet because we were originally supposed to do Louise Frank's Third Symphony until we had a little problem with having winds and brass in our stage. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to find another comparable length piece by a female composer of the 19th century for strings only. And it really doesn't exist. If one exists, I have yet to find it. And if one exists, please tell me, write in the note, send me a message. I'd love to know about it, because I've done a lot of digging, and the ones that might have existed don't exist in print, or they are no longer in existent in manuscript or whatever. And so I chose to make my own with Emily Meyer's String Quartet. And so it's very exciting. And after that same week, we're premiering a seminar for American Lyric Theater. I'm Associate Artistic Director of American Lyric Theater, which is a service organization that trains young American composers and librettists to play in a sandbox together, essentially, and develop a process for writing opera. And so as part of that, we're doing a free 8-week seminar, for a lot of different it's a symposium that has a lot of different seminars. And mine is called From Erased to Self-Empowered. Celebration of BIPOC composers and librettists from the 17th century until today. So we're juxtaposing works by BIPOC composers whose operas specifically were erased from history because of the color of their skin or their heritage, mm-hmm. and comparing that side by side with our modern day composers who are self-empowered and are able to tell their stories on their own terms. And so I'm doing sort of a 90-minute lecture one day, and we have a panel discussion with composers, some very prominent composers who are mentors as well as alumni from American Lyric Theater. And we have librettists the next day, and then 2 days later, we have a concert of 15 excerpts that I've curated from the 17th century until now, including a couple very special ones that I think are going to blow people away that they haven't heard of before. Yeah, so those are in
you're doing some important work there, really. I mean, that is exactly what we need to be hearing these days. So that's incredible. So thank you for doing that. And I have to say thank you so much for being here with us. I know some of these things are difficult to talk about, but it's so important that we put a face to all of this as well. And your stories are amazing. And I'm thrilled to know you, really. So Kelly, thank you for being with us this month, and good luck with the Carmen and the Haitian Creole and the cowbell and all of that stuff. And I'm going to look for that stream and listen to it. Okay. So cheers. Thank you. Cheers. Enjoy your beers. Chen. Enjoy your hotel room, and we'll see you soon. Okay. Bye. So thank you guys for being here today. I just have to tell you, this podcast is produced by the Foundry Arts. And just to let you know about it, Foundry Arts is a lab committed to artists in music and the performing arts by promoting a more diverse, equitable, inclusive, and sustainable cultural landscape in the USA and beyond. You can find out more about their collaborative development projects and programs at Foundry Arts by visiting thefoundryarts.com. And before we get going, I'd like to say thank you to our whole team, Emily, Rob, Marcy, Rome, Corey, and Pat. And thank you to my father-in-law and good friend, Randy Plimpton, for offering this beautiful house and the steak dinner and the beer. And I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners, especially for joining us for these talks. So please join us next month for that podcast. And in the meantime, Mado, thank you. Live long and prosper, and I'll see you guys soon. You got your answer.